I warmly welcome you, Safiya, to the
Thank you
podcast.
so much for inviting me.
Let's take it from the beginning. Safiya, what were you like back in the high school? When did you first get that spark that made you choose biomedical engineering as your path?
Right, so I was also brought up in an Indian education system. So back when we had to choose our subjects towards high school, we were given the options of either bio or comp sci. We weren't really given amalgam of multiple subjects. So when I read about the field of biomedical engineering and realized that it's a nexus across all fields that are currently there, honestly, that's what made me go for it because I realized that medicine wasn't my cup of tea. So this was another avenue where I could definitely help um, advance human health science.
You mentioned that biomedical engineering is an amalgam of many
Yes.
fields. Did you find it difficult to handle all these interdisciplinary topics during your masters?
Um, I would say yes because I had done my undergrad in BITS Pilani, and coding per se wasn't a huge part of the biotech degree. Um, so that did take a while for me to pick up, but mostly the courses were pretty easy, and it was quite a bit of hands-on training, and the previous TAs that were there in the class really helped out in getting me integrated into the subject and getting me great scores, honestly.
Since you came from a biotechnology background and found coding a bit difficult at first, what made you take the leap into a biomedical engineering master's field?
I've always wanted to come to the US for biomedical engineering, and the top school in that was Hopkins, and this is the top program in that. So there were a few limited options, I would say, back home for biomedical as a degree. So we had biotechnology, which mainly dealt with microbiology and using bacteria work and some cell and tissue engineering, but that was very foundational concepts. They didn't really have the funding or the resources to really have the ample amount of equipment and labs that you currently see in US universities.
Based on the opportunities you saw, you chose to pursue biomedical engineering in the US. And of course, getting into Johns Hopkins is not everyone's cup of tea. What steps did you take that helped you achieve this so that students like us
I
can
have
aim
it.
for it too?
That's a great question because I'm the first one from my university to really get into BME as a degree from biotech, or I barely know anyone from the bio. So it was a bit of a challenge finding that roadmap that would get me here. And on top of that, I was the COVID batch, the one that graduated in 2020. So it was an interesting time because the first semester I didn't have a choice but to do it online from Dubai. So I had ensured that my GPA was pretty high. I had a GPA of 9.7 in bits. I mean, that you just maintain because having a high GPA will ultimately open doors, whether you want to pursue further education or not. So that was just ingrained in my head as a child. And I had participated in a few conferences that were given opportunities to me from the undergrad. So I had presented some posters in them. Um, we didn't really have the opportunity to write papers, but I know that in some Indian universities you get the options to have summer research in labs and to be able to be part of research papers. So that's one thing US universities definitely look out for. I'd also done a few internships in my undergrad, so that definitely helped me learn how the industrial process of biotech is and a lot of experiences like that. And at that time, the GRE and SAT scores were, the TOEFL scores were pretty valued. So I had pretty high scores in that as well.
Is getting high grades the only secret sauce to getting into John Hopkins?
I mean, that was for my time, but I would say right now, what the US universities really care about is the amount of experience that you have outside of academics. Whether you really pursued a question, that's driven your research and how far you've gone into answering that research question, really.
So it's really about what you have done in the 4 years of your bachelor's, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
I have a basic question, Afrin. I'm also from a biomedical background, and honestly, during third or final year, it often feels like we are lost. You get exposure to every field, but it's odd to choose one direction. Now, looking at your journey, you did bachelor's in biotech, got into one of the top programs in the world, completed your master's, and now you are pursuing a PhD in neuroengineering. So, when and how did you realize that neuroengineering was the field you
Right.
wanted to specialize in?
Mhm. So I've always been fascinated with the brain. When we were in school, there was this international competition called Brainobi, where we had to essentially learn everything about the anatomy of the brain, and that's where I realized that it's such a fascinating field and the amount of research that you can do in it. So I'm still doing my PhD in BME, but one of the focus tracks of that is neuroengineering. Um, so in my master's, I had done the thesis track. I didn't just do courses. I had joined a lab which is involved in more theranostics. So what we do is we create therapeutics and use imaging to essentially track those therapeutics in a neuro disease. And the first one that I had dealt with was intracerebral hemorrhage. So we had made therapeutics for that, and we essentially saw in preclinical models, like mice models, that there's a huge difference in the improvement score. And that really got me hooked into improving lives essentially in that field.
That's an inspiring path. Tell us about a moment in your research when nothing worked or a moment when something finally did. How did that feel?
Right. So a lot of our work is wet lab, and a bit of that is also coding as well, as I mentioned. So there was this point where we have patient scans, and essentially I had to relearn a whole new coding language because we had to shift from MATLAB to Python for our image analysis. And that was a bit difficult because I was getting stuck in how to essentially translate this whole library of code into a whole other language and getting the whole pipeline to work. So I had quite a few roadblocks in that. At that point, ChatGPT had come out. So, but what essentially ended up happening was that ChatGPT told me that go and consult with an expert, and that was a bit frustrating because that's supposed to be my expert, right? But yeah, I essentially just relearned Python and machine learning completely, and I was able to get through that issue and finally get everything to work.
Are you grateful to be a part of this AI generation in biomedical research?
For sure. I mean, it's a difficult generation because there is so much that's available to us, and on a daily basis, you see such huge strides in research or in life in general, which I don't feel was there back in the early 2000s.
Since AI has helped you in your research, what do you see happening in next 5 years? How do you think AI will evolve and impact biomedical engineering?
Well, I mean, it's already pretty there. I mean, AI right now, it just helps me to refine the images that I acquire using an MRI. So sometimes if you have low contrast in your images, it can kind of help tune that signal so you can see what you really want. Um, in terms, I would say that in dry lab, where it's mainly coding or protein engineering or those sort of fields, I definitely feel that it's going to make things much faster. you're going to have better therapeutic like candidates for different diseases, and in those ways it can help you. But I do not think that it's there yet to really be very involved in wet lab, because we do mice surgeries, and I don't think a robot is that fine as yet to really cause those surgeries and stitch them back up in time and still let the mice live, you know. So I still feel there's a bit left over there.
All right. As of now, we have robots assisting in surgeries, not fully performing them.
Yeah.
Systems like Da Vinci are great, but regulation still
Okay,
play a big
surgeon,
role.
yeah, and I think it's a scale as well, you know, because with humans, your organs are much larger, right? But with the mice, organs are significantly smaller. So I feel like those fine motor skills still need to be much more developed.
Do you really need to do a master's after a bachelor's in biomedical engineering, especially if you are from India or any other country?
It depends country to country. So, like I said, I'm from Dubai, and we didn't have as much resources or lab experience as the universities in the US or Europe, you know, they provide. So, for me personally, I needed to go for my master's so that one, I would have a clear idea of all the fields that are available. Second, so that I could join into a lab and gain some experience, which would get me into a PhD.
Hence, it really depends on your goals,
It depends on the
doesn't
goal.
it?
Like, so if you are more interested into AI development, then I think a master's is sufficient for you to get job opportunities. But if you wanted to go into R&D and start at better positions in a company, I would say a PhD is required.
That's a great point. So, in your own words, how would you describe biomedical engineering? What does it mean to you?
What it is to me, I would say it's a field in which you can contribute to the advancement of human health kind in not just humans. I mean, you can do it for any species you want. If you want to go into veterinary, that's your choice. But I do believe that it's a field that will give you the tools to advance health science, whether you want that to be through wet lab or whether you want that to be through dry lab. Um, yeah, I do believe they care a lot more about the engineering side of it rather than trying to figure out what the mechanism of the biology is. So it's a field where you use the foundations of biology to essentially engineer tools that would advance health science.
I recently heard news about funding cuts in US institutions like Harvard. What do you think about the current situation for international students in the US?
Okay, let's not go into this because okay. All I will say is that US is a democracy and leaders get elected every 4 years. So policies will change, policies can come back. Um, right now, it's definitely a difficult time and it's very stressful trying to navigate what tomorrow is going to look like. Um, but what I would say is that if you have a great university offer, just go for that. The universities definitely will try to protect its students, as at least that's what I've seen here. Um, and a master's degree is just 2 years. So if you want to go for a master's degree, it's just 2 years, and there are definitely still job opportunities available to a lot of people. I know many who graduated just last week and have great opportunities in California and Boston. So it's not as horrible as the media makes it look like. It's definitely scary, but give it like another year, and I'm sure things might settle down. Yeah, let's not jeopardize my visa status here.
That was a great answer. The reason I asked that question is because we genuinely want to understand the current situation. For many students from India and around the world, the first decision they make after their bachelor is, okay, I'm going to do a master's. And more often than not, the first country that comes to their mind is the United
Which
States
is
of
true. I
America.
mean, they still have huge amount of resources, huge amount of lab space. Like the kind of projects people are working on here are insane. Um, and very intellectual. So I would definitely still say at the moment, US universities still do have a great standing in the world. The second I would say would be probably China. Um, but then there comes the language barrier that some people aren't able to cross. And I mean, if you go into the list of top 10 universities, you have what Singapore, US, China, and I think there's one in UK, in Europe, if I'm not wrong. But right now, European universities are definitely calling people to go to their schools. And I would say if you have the option for security, I would say go to Europe. Um, but like I said, it's just another 3 more years. Things will settle down by then, so they can't get rid of their international students because that's what brings in a lot of collaboration, brings in a lot of funding for the universities as well. So.
Given the changing climate, should they also consider places like Europe or China?
Yes, I would definitely say that. Yeah. Um, but not just that they should go for those universities, there's also lesser offers that are being sent out by current universities. So for the next cohort that's coming in 2025, I know that 50% of them have been rescinded, which means they've offered the PhD position, but then they had been cancelled because of immediate lack of funding. And but I don't think that's going to affect masters because in the master's situation, the students are themselves funding the program, right? So whether it's via loans or whether it's their own capital. So I don't think a master's should be affected that much, but a PhD I would say is a bit more dicey at the moment.
While doing your master's at Johns Hopkins, were there any opportunities for students to develop entrepreneurial skills or work on startups?
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure, for sure. So when I did my master's, I had started up a company in my first semester in Dubai. But that was more for Dubai side entrepreneurship. But the track, when you choose a focus track, like I had taken cell and tissue engineering, but you're not limited to the courses that belong to that focus track. I had also taken a BME entrepreneurship class in which you essentially come up with a design for a prototype of a technology, and then you pitch it to investors. So you have the entire process of what will work, how to pitch, what investors care about, how to make a whole portfolio. So they definitely teach you those things if you want to learn it. There's also a office in Hopkins called Johns Hopkins Technology Ventures, which deals with IP, deals with getting your products to the market. So they do have courses, they have academies as well, which mostly if you're like a doctoral candidate, you get to join, but there are definitely other opportunities to shadow people and learn from them.
That's great to hear. Could you share your personal experience? Or was doing a master's in US different from your bachelor's in terms of educational system?
Um, the grading system, I would say, is a lot more lenient. Um, in BITS Pilani, we had relative grading. So the biotech department in my batch was just 16 of us. So it was like if one person will get an A, another person will get an A minus. Just even if it's just 2 points difference. So that's completely different because your grades are curved. So it's not that difficult to score. I would say they put more emphasis on what you're learning rather than what your scores are. So that was a huge difference. Um, Secondly, um, the amount that they have, the labs that you do are a lot more rigorous, I would say, and a lot more fun because you get to learn about how to model biosystems and opportunities that you might not get in Indian universities. Um, I mean, it's been like at least 4 years now since I was in undergrad, so I don't know how things have changed there. Um, it was honestly pretty easy. What I had a issue with was, of course, COVID and doing everything online at a 9 hour time zone difference. So that sometimes got to me, but I did well, I think.
You also mentioned earlier how intensely students are involved in projects in the US. Can you give us some insight into that project culture?
So I can talk about my projects because that, at least those which are published. Um, So the first project that I worked on was essentially using liposomes, which are small vesicles that are formed by lipids, which are kind of fats that form the cells in our system. And we loaded them with cytokines, and then we introduced them into intracerebral hemorrhage mice, and we saw them recovering essentially. So that was a great way to introduce me to nanoparticle systems and engineering nanoparticle systems so that they can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is a huge hindrance to the current therapies out there, and essentially have like a whole treatment study that showed that introduced me to animal handling, behavioral assessments, and that was really cool for me. The second project that we worked on was uh, after learning about lipid nanosystems, I went on to extracellular vesicles, which are these tiny vesicles that are secreted by all our cells, and they're used for intracellular communication. But we learned how to isolate them and engineer them so that we could load them with our essentially make stealth vectors that would protect therapeutics from being degraded in the body, increase their circulation time, get up to the brain, and cure cancer and genetic diseases. That's essentially what I'm working on right now. I mean, we are a small lab, so there's essentially just like a postdoc and me in our lab. So we have around 15 projects amongst us that are going on at the same time. But yeah, my PhD project is tracking extracellular vesicles for genetic therapy using MRI and yeah, using MRI.
Was your recent conference? I think I saw a
Oh,
post
it was
about
so
it.
cool.
Sorry.
Right. So that's one thing that I really like about academia, that we have so many conferences, and our lab we go to a lot of international conferences. So the entire travel and lodging is paid for. So you get to meet like really intellectual minds in these conferences because it's people from all over the world. This year we had it in Hawaii. It's called ISMRM, International Society of Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. Um, it was a lot of fun visiting the place, attending the conferences, and presenting my work to people who found it interesting. So that was a huge plus.
How important is it for students to get exposure like that early in
I
their
think it's
academic
really
life?
important because it's not just academics who are scholars who are there. They have also companies that come and showcase their devices and showcase what they're doing currently in the field. So, one, it can get you connected to the industry if that's what you're looking for, or if you want to continue into academia, such as being a postdoc or professors, you have the top of the top attending these conferences. So if you shadow people, you can ask questions, you can directly talk to them, and then that might get you lab opportunities later down the line. It can foster collaborations, which might end up in cool publications and impact factors. So I feel that it's really important for students to really go for these conferences because you're not just meeting smart elders, you're also meeting your entire cohort who will become the next gen of scientists in the field. So it's important to have those connections, I feel.
Could you guide students on how to attend conference? Like what are the steps from writing a paper to getting accepted and
Right.
presenting,
So
etc.?
one, you'll have to narrow down the field that you're working in. So since we work in MRI, that's one of the major conferences for us. Um, so the first thing you would do is you have a project, you get some preliminary data for it, and then you write an abstract. Now, abstract guidelines depend conference to conference. So some of them, and then you submit an abstract with the permission of all your collaborators. They go through the abstract that you've written. You have a few figures, preferably in vivo figures, because that's what a lot of international conferences care about, whether your work is translationable. And then you submit it, and depending on which country you're from, you might need a visa for the conference, or so. And conferences, they get back to you pretty quickly with whether they have accepted your abstract for a poster or an oral presentation or what have you. So then you start applying for your visa, you book all of your accommodation, flights, everything, and the university will reimburse that amount to you. And then you just go there. So this time I had a digital poster, which essentially you have to make like a 10-minute video about your entire project, the background, the data, the future goals, and you upload that, and then you basically for 1 hour you have like a time slot for 1 hour where you will have your huge screen and you're going to be presenting it to whoever comes up to you. Um, I also had an oral presentation where you have like a 5 minute talk time to talk everything about your project beforehand, and then people come and ask questions to you if you want. So that's your part of the conference. The rest of the conference, you have sessions that are back to back and go across multiple fields like MRI and inflammation, MRI and MS, Alzheimer's, whatever, AI and MRI. So you have all of that. So depending on what your interest is, you can definitely go and attend those talks and talk to people who have posters as well. I feel like posters are better than oral talks because you get to really engage with the speaker more, and that helps foster ideas better. Um, then the rest of the time, definitely have like a day or two where you get to explore where you are, because it's not often that you might get to go back to that place. So definitely take time out for that, make connections, and go out for dinners and things like that. So
Now I have a bunch of frequently asked questions from students. Let's do a rapid fire round. The first question is, what's the difference between biomedical engineering and
So,
biotechnology?
biomedical engineering, what I've seen is that it deals more with humans. So, you get to work on projects that might involve clinical data sets or clinical trials. And ultimately, your goal is to get it to a point that it can work in humans. Biotech, I feel like, can be more applicable to the microbiome industry or the veterinarian industry, or even more plants and agriculture, as well as they care more about the basic foundational biology of things, if that makes sense.
The second question is coding a must have skill in biomedical engineering?
I would I would agree that it is. I mean, at least have a foundational level, because even if you're just doing like cell culture and tissue engineering, there is still a slight amount of MATLAB that you might need to know, and it definitely looks better on your CV when and if at any point you want to pivot into analyzing clinical data sets, it always helps. So I wouldn't say that you need to be the most advanced coder ever, but at least definitely have a foundational amount of experience in it.
Can you list some tools and programming languages that are trending and useful in this field?
Yeah, most of us we deal with MATLAB for imaging analysis or even with writing genetic sequences. Um, the other one would be Python for if anyone wants to go into machine learning or AI types. But I would say MATLAB would be the priority, then Python, and then maybe R if they want to just add on to it.
What are some underrated careers in biomedical engineering that students often
Um,
overlook?
I would say IP bio and like bio law, in which you basically help the legal team of biotech ventures, whether it be like consultation or ensuring that their technology is unique in the market and doesn't like have clashes later with existing technology. I feel that's a very it has a high salary, I would say, but a lot of people don't go into that. But that also requires a lot of foundational knowledge of how um, biosystems work, and it's a niche field, but it is an interesting field as well.
Is it okay to not to know what you want to
Oh,
specialize
yeah,
in
for
early on?
sure. It's completely fine. I mean, you're going to start when you join the master's program, you have six different fields that are just presented to you. And even if you choose one, you can take courses from any of them, whether it be immunoengineering, cell tissue, image analysis, neuroengineering, or just AI in biomed, sorry. So it's completely fine if you want to just explore everything. The only requirements for a master's is that you finish 30 credits, and if you have a thesis, get amount of work done before your professor says, okay, you're cool to graduate. So yeah, it's completely fine to take that master's time to explore everything you want to do, um, and then specialize later if you want to.
After completing a master's, is it better to go for a PhD immediately or take up a job in the US
Like I
first?
said, it completely depends on your goal. If you are the source that wants to use AI and biomed, and if you're pretty good at coding and if you have like a project done, I don't see the need for you to really struggle in a PhD because the PhD life is a little bit slower than what you would see in an industry. Because a PhD gives you space to really think about how to solve a problem. Whereas in an industry, it's just more goal oriented, so you need to have results pretty fast. So I feel in that specific field, it's better to go into the industry because then you will learn tools immediately on the fly because you have to, and you cannot. A PhD is not going to improve your coding skills. It's going to be the same regardless. But if you want to go into R&D, I would still say that a lot of jobs here they do require the basic PhD degree. It's very rare that they take master's students on.
Many entry-level R&D jobs require a master degree in US. So, is a master's really necessary after a bachelor's, especially for international
Um,
students?
the pay isn't great, and you're always going to have a ceiling. So if you ever want to be the lead of a project team, you're going to need a PhD.
Lastly, if you add one piece of advice to give to aspiring biomedical
I would
engineers,
say
what would it be?
read publications if possible, because because undergrads don't really get time to look outside their courses. They're so busy in just getting those scores. But I feel like take the time to read publications because then you know at least what kind of experiments interest you and what kind of results you want to have in your life. Be very clear about whether you want to do research for the sake of doing research or whether your end goal is to be financially stable because those are two very different paths. And yeah, just wherever you end up going, maximize the resources there, and you don't have to be in the topmost college to have a great career. That's what I would say. A lot of the PhD students I know, they go for a postdoc, which is kind of like this bridge between being a professor and being a PhD student. So that lasts for like 2 to 3 years. And for those who want to stay in academia, they go through that route. And of course, a lot of universities do hire them. The pay is around $65,000 per year before tax. Um, but for industrial jobs at the moment, they're looking for people who have a bit of coding experience. R&D, you would have places like the NIH or Thermo Fisher where you might be able to work. Um, but at the current moment, there's a bit of hesitance from companies to offer the H-1B visa. And all I'll say is just that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So all you have to do is just start somewhere.
Thank you so much, Safiya, for such an honest and insightful conversation. I'm sure our listeners will benefit greatly from your journey, your clarity, and your advice. Looking forward to seeing you achieve even greater things in the future.
It was great meeting you as well. Thank you so much for extending the opportunity to talk.